pranam to our revered Vice President Maharaj Swami Atmajnanananda Ji Maharaj, our revered Vice President Maharaj Swami Smarananji Maharaj, our revered General Secretary Maharaj Swami Prabhananand Maharaj, all revered trustees, senior sadhus, all dear brothers, revered Matajis, all dear friends and devotees. It is difficult for me to express what a great honor and privilege and joy it is to stand before all of you here today. Because in my mind, the Belur Mutt is the most sacred spot on the entire earth. And today, Thakur's Tithi Puja Day, is the most sacred day of the entire year. So it's really a great privilege and a great joy to be able to speak a few words about Sri Ramakrishna today. A year or so ago, I was requested to write an article on a topic which I found to be very fascinating. This topic was Lila Dhyana and Lila Chintana, meditation and reflection on the divine play of Sri Ramakrishna. So I thought that I would spend a few moments with you this afternoon in discussing this topic, because I found it to be very practical and very helpful for one's spiritual practice and spiritual life. This topic has three main components. One is Lila, the other Jnana, and the third Chintana. So I'd like to go through these three and examine exactly what we mean by these different terms. The term Lila has a variety of different meanings. And Sri Ramakrishna was very fond of this term. When we read the Patamrata, we find he's often mentioning the Nitya Lila. But the Lila has different meanings. Generally it refers to something which is a kind of sport or a pastime, a type of play, a diversion or an amusement. And it also carries the sense of something done very easily, without any effort, a type of child's play. And we find a sense of not complete unreality, but it's not perfectly real. We don't take it so seriously. When we have this concept that it's done as a play, then we don't feel the sting of it so much. Swamiji once explained it by giving the illustration of two puppies that are playing with each other and biting each other and squealing, but they're enjoying it. They're enjoying the play. So this is a part of what we mean by this term Lila. But we also find that it's used to refer to a type of manifestation of the divine. And Sri Ramakrishna speaks of different types of Lila. On February 24th, 1884, he was discussing this with Aaron. He said, "Since my arm was injured, a deep change has come over me. I now delight only in the Nada Lila, the human manifestation of God. Nitya and Lila. The Nitya is the indivisible Satchit Ananda, and the Lila or sport takes various forms, such as the Lila of God, the Lila as the deities, the Lila as man, and the Lila as the universe." Vaishnav Charan used to say that one has attained perfect knowledge if one believes in God sporting as man. I wouldn't admit it then, but now I realize that he was right. It is God alone who is sporting as man. So we see that Sri Ramakrishna spoke of Lila in terms of all different types of manifestations of Brahman. Even the personal God is a manifestation of Brahman and falls within this category of Lila. So we spoke of the different deities, even this whole physical universe, all living beings. All of it is being kind of play. Not real in the sense that Brahman manifests and changes himself into this universe the way milk converts into curd. More in the sense that this universe, this Brahman is like a vast ocean, and the waves are playing on the surface of the ocean. They're sporting on the surface of the ocean. This is the feeling we get from this idea of Leela. It's also a way of explaining this universe which can't be explained. There's no real explanation. There's no way to understand how God can have any desire to create or feel any need or have any lack or any want. So we say it was done simply for sport, simply out of enjoyment, simply out of a type of play. Otherwise, we wonder how we can speak of that which is perfect having any need to create anything other than itself. So this is why this concept of Leela is so important. A different way of explaining that which is unexplainable. We can say in one sense it's an optional explanation to Maya. Maya has a little bit more of a negative quality to it, but this Leela is also a way of explaining this. Now I want to turn to this Nada Leela, because even here we find two different kinds. From a philosophical and non-dualistic point of view, we see that it's God himself who has become all living beings, has forgotten himself in this play, in this drama, like an actor who gets into his role so deeply that he forgets that he's acting. Even these battles between nations, these fights between different individuals, this is all a play of that one God dwelling within as each and every living human being. This is probably the sense in which Sri Ramakrishna meant when he said that now I want to fix my mind on this Nada Leela. This was his vision. This wasn't philosophy for him. He saw each and every human being as God. He used to say, Tumi jano or not jano, tumi ram. Whether you know it or not, you were God himself. He used to look around the room, see his disciples sitting in front of him, and he would say that. Tumi jano or not jano, tumi ram. So this was his understanding. For us, we can look at this Nada Leela from a second point of view. And this brings in the idea of Atma, the divine incarnation. God dwells, of course, within all beings. We just heard a beautiful talk on that, but in a special sense. And Sri Ramakrishna meant it in a very special sense. When he said, he who was Rama, he who was Krishna, is now Sri Ramakrishna. So we have this idea that the personal God can manifest in some unimaginable way. Again, Leela. We have no way of explaining it. But how he can manifest as the divine incarnation. Now we have many traditions which take this manifestation of the divine incarnation and meditation and contemplation on it as a very important part of their spiritual practice. We find it very much emphasized with the Vaishnavas, and looking at the life of Sri Krishna in all of the stages, from the infancy stage to the childhood to the boyhood stage to even as he's the charioteer for Arjuna. And we also see one special aspect of Leela, and that is that these divine incarnations had a type of playfulness about them. Practical jokes. We see it in the life of Krishna, with stealing the clothes of the gopis and fooling his mother Yashoda, eating the butter. We see it in the life of Chaitanya Deva, and we see it very much also in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. When we examine the life of Sri Ramakrishna, we see every aspect of this phenomenon of Leela, where all of the players play their own part, all of the disciples who need to come are there, and is there to record his words. Swamiji is there to spread his message. So we see this in his life, and when we examine it, we become convinced that there was something special, something unusual, some divine play was being enacted on the human stage during the lifetime of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother and all the direct disciples. Now I want to turn to the second theme, and that is meditation. We're familiar with the concept of meditation, generally as taught in Raja Yoga, Patanjali's Raja Yoga, and we find that the main emphasis here is on concentration and one-pointedness. This seems to be the most important element, this idea of ekagrata, making the mind extremely one-pointed. Sri Ramakrishna gives a beautiful illustration of this in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. He used to speak about Arjuna and his practice of archery. We read in the Gospel, at the time of aiming at a bird, Drona asked him, "What do you see? Do you see these kings?" "No, sir." "Do you see me?" "No." "The trees?" "No." "Do you see the bird on the tree?" "No." "What do you see then?" "Only the eye of the bird." This is the extreme nature of this one-pointedness that is necessary for the type of meditation that's practiced in Raja Yoga, and we're all familiar with how difficult it is. We're almost tempted to say it's impossible. We know that Arjuna's first reaction when he heard this talk to him by Sri Krishna was, Vaya Iva Suduskaram, it's as difficult to control this mind as it is to control the wind. So we can easily see that the mind will rebel. The mind likes to run around, it doesn't like to remain quiet. It gets bored, it gets tired, and it may fall asleep even. These are very common obstacles that we all find in meditation. Now, the difficulty here is when the mind loses its contact with the object of meditation, it can end up anywhere. That means that when we lose our concentration on the eye of the bird, we may lose the bird itself. And this is a problem in meditation, that when the mind wanders away, it can go anywhere, and we're often not even aware of it. And this is the reason why this meditation on the divine play of an incarnation of God, or a great realized soul, is a great help to us in our meditation. It allows us to keep the concept of ekagrata. We're still remaining one-pointed, but this one point has many facets, like a beautiful gem. When the mind wants to wander, instead of losing that gem, it can go from one facet to another facet. This way it can stay within that realm, just as a cow is allowed to graze within the circle determined by the length of the rope that it's tethered to. There's a nice, large area for us to graze and enjoy this divine sport, and yet we can't go beyond that circle. It keeps us within. So it's a type of ekagrata, a type of one-pointedness, but within a larger circle. Now let me try to give a few examples. Suppose we want to fix our minds on Sri Ramakrishna. Then as we enter into the chamber of the heart, we can find ourselves seated in Dakshineshwara. Thakur will be in front of us. He'll be seated on the small couch. The disciples will be sitting near us. Narendra, Baburam, Rakhal, they'll all be around. Anne will be in the corner, carefully watching everything, maybe writing something down. We can see Sri Ramakrishna, see the mind will get restless. So what do? We'll see Sri Ramakrishna stand up. He'll ask Ramlal to sing a song. Then he'll start to dance. All the disciples, devotees will get around him in a circle. They'll dance around him. Sri Ramakrishna himself will begin to dance, perhaps a little to ecstasy. All of this can be going on in our minds at the time of meditation. The mind wants to run, let it run after Sri Ramakrishna. Let us watch him wake up in the morning. We can see him walk to all of the pictures, clapping his hands, chanting the names of God. It's a very wonderful type of practice. We can go to the corner of Sri Ramakrishna's room, where on that night of Palahari Kali Puja, he worshipped Holy Mother. We can imagine that whole divine play that took place. He worshipped her as Shodashi, the Divine Mother. And at the end of that whole worship, offered his mala, offered the fruits of all of his spiritual practices at her feet. This can be an entire meditation for us. So this is a way of keeping the mind fixed within that one area. We can demarcate that area as Sri Ramakrishna's room. Now, if we're too restless for even that, we can let him leave the room. We can follow him to the Kali temple. We can watch him take chamar and start to chant Mother Kali. Again, go into ecstasy, perhaps sing some songs from Mother Kali. Then we can follow him back into the room. It's a wonderful practice. We had a great monk of our order. I am very sorry that he passed away far too early for me to have ever seen him. Swami Atmajnanananda. Many of our senior sadhus knew Paramesh Maharaj very well. This is one of his favorite themes. If we read the letters of Swami Atmajnananda, we see him giving the most fascinating examples of this type of spiritual practice. In one place he actually says that there's a new game called table tennis. Why not go in your mind, go into Sri Ramakrishna's room, set up that table there, and play table tennis with Sri Ramakrishna? Yes, he actually said that. He emphasized this idea to a great extent. I had some quotes that I was going to read. The time is short, but if you read the letters of Swami Atmajnananda, you'll see how beautifully a creative mind like his can understand this type of spiritual practice and how much he recommended it to others. Now, I want to mention a few of the great advantages to this type of spiritual practice. One is that it allows the use of the imagination. Now, this is very important because the imagination is what generally gets us into trouble. When the mind wanders, that's because of the imagination. But we can use this positive side of the imagination to counter this negative side of the imagination. There's a wonderful small book that was written by Swami Atmajnananda called The Mind and Its Control. And he tells a story about a man and a mongoose. This man was walking down the street one day and he had a basket in his hand. And a friend of his came and asked him what was in the basket. And the man said, well, listen, I'm on my way to the tavern and I have a problem with drinking. When I start drinking, I drink too much. And when I drink too much, I start seeing snakes everywhere. And I have a terrible fear of snakes. So I carry a mongoose with me. Now his friend said, how foolish you are. These snakes are imaginary snakes. How can a real mongoose drive off imaginary snakes? So his friend opened his basket and showed him it was empty. And he said, you see, I'm not such a fool. My mongoose is also an imaginary mongoose. So the point was that through this positive side of the imagination, we can counteract the negative side. It's just as Sri Ramakrishna said, if we get a thorn in our foot, we take a second thorn. That second thorn is a vidyamaya. That can remove the first thorn, then we can go beyond both. But we're not yet at the stage to go beyond both, so we take use of this positive side of the imagination. So this is one thing, the use of the imagination. Second thing is, we don't have to have that control of the mind that the yogi has. Sometimes we think if we don't have that perfect control, meditation isn't for us and we give it up. This is a way for those of us who don't have such mental control to also practice meditation and gradually increase our power of concentration. The third advantage is that this meditation completely rids us of the problem of boredom, the problem of drowsiness, the problem of the mind entering into these states of lower types of states where we lose full awareness and may even fall asleep, because it's a fascinating type of process, so it counteracts that. Now there's one other great advantage, which is also a bit of a paradox. For most of us, we take up this type of meditation because the mind is not able to concentrate on the image of Sri Ramakrishna in that still state. But we may find that through this type of meditation, the mind develops a desire to become quiet. Then what do we do at that time? Then we tell Baburam, you please carry Sri Ramakrishna back to his bed, to his cot, let him sit there, let him go into samadhi, and we'll simply watch And as our concentration deepens, we can forget that anyone else is in the room. We can forget where we're seated. We can forget even ourselves. And the mind can be filled with Sri Ramakrishna alone. And we've achieved exactly what we couldn't have achieved earlier by allowing the mind to run about a bit and keeping it within that circle. Now, there are certain special fruits of this type of meditation. One is that there's a feeling of great joy, because we start to feel that we're actually in the presence of Sri Ramakrishna. If this meditation deepens, then it doesn't feel like a type of imagination. We feel that we're seated in the room with Sri Ramakrishna, that we're surrounded by all of the direct disciples and the devotees of Sri Ramakrishna. And it's a great feeling of joy, and this joy carries over. When we're finished with that meditation, a very slight type of nasha, type of intoxication is there. We see with Sri Ramakrishna, after he would go into spiritual moods, he would reel like a drunkard. We, of course, won't get that type of extreme intoxication, but something will be there, will carry over for us. We also find that this helps us very much in establishing a relationship with Sri Ramakrishna, because we're there with him, we're sitting in front of him. And this is one thing that Sri Ramakrishna emphasized very much. Form a relationship with your chosen ideal. So this is helpful for that also. From a philosophical point of view, we also find that there's a great advantage to having a meditation where we ourselves are present in that meditation. That means that at the time of meditation, I'm aware of myself as seated before Sri Ramakrishna. That means that I've forgotten my physical body. I'm no longer thinking of myself as dwelling within that physical body. And at the time of meditation, that becomes lost. When the meditation is over, if it becomes deep, we may ask ourselves, oh, where was I? I even forgot where I was sitting. I was sitting in the shrine room. I thought I was in Dakshineswar. So this helps us eliminate to a certain extent that extreme feeling of identification we have with this physical body, and helps us feel that this identification with the body is not something absolute. It's really the result of a certain type of maya or ignorance. We also feel in this type of meditation that all of the elements in this meditation, that means Sri Ramakrishna himself, the room and his surroundings, all of them exist within consciousness and are consciousness. Thakur used to say, Chinmay Sham, Chinmay Tham, that the Lord himself is pure consciousness and his abode is pure consciousness. Now we can apply the same idea to this universe we've created at the time of meditation. It's not simply a projection of the mind, it's actually consciousness itself. Thakur dwelling within consciousness, and ourselves and all of the elements in the room also within this pure consciousness. Now I mentioned that this type of meditation has a carryover effect, and this will lead me to this final element, this idea of reflection. When we practice this kind of meditation, the mind automatically will find itself going back. And really a portion of the mind will find is living in Dakshineswar all of the time. Part of the mind is always with Thakur if we practice this kind of meditation. On the other hand, if we want to be able to practice this in some deep sense, then we have to practice reflection as a separate type of spiritual discipline, because they help each other. The meditation automatically leads to reflection, but the reflection helps deepen our meditation. And here I would like to just mention two special spiritual practices that I find especially helpful for this. One is spiritual reading. We're very, very fortunate that we have two masterpieces. One is Lila Prasanga by Swami Atmajnanananda. This is such a beautiful work, not only in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, but with so many subtle philosophical ideas. And then, of course, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. This is something that has never in the history of the world been accomplished. That the words of the Divine Incarnation have been taken down so accurately that we know exactly where he was sitting, we know exactly who was in the room, what time it was, even the phase of the moon, even the direction that Ganga is going. So reading this is a type of meditation, really, in itself, a type of contemplation. And the more we read this Gospel of Ramakrishna, the Tamrita, the more the mind finds itself dwelling there. In my student days, before joining, I was very fond of this practice. I would read the Gospel of Ramakrishna for sometimes hours on end. And when I would sit for meditation, I would find that the room itself would somehow transform itself into Thakur's room. So I could see the great effect of letting the mind dwell on this divine Leela of Sri Ramakrishna through the words of M. And M, we have to bow our heads before M every day for giving us this wonderful work. So this is one thing that I find extremely helpful. And this can be done in many ways. We can read a simple portion of the Gospel and use that as our meditation. We can read about Thakur on the steamer with Keshav and the Vijaya and the whole conversation. That can be our meditation. Or we can simply let the mind dwell within that room of Sri Ramakrishna or Kashipur or other places, but basing it all on what we've learned from this Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Now the final point that I want to mention as the second great aid to this practice is pilgrimage. There's nothing like actually going to the place of this divine Leela. We have these very sacred places just here. The people of Calcutta are so fortunate, I hope you all realize it, that for us, we have to travel a long way to be able to cross the Ganga and sit in Thakur's room. But to actually do that will leave an impression on the mind that we can never get simply from reading. I've been very fortunate that at a young age I went to Thakur's room before reading the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, so that when I read it, I knew what it meant. When it said he's sitting on this cot, he's facing this direction, I could picture everything. M, the recorder of the Gospel, used to tell the devotees that you please go there, go to Dakshineshwar, go to Kamarpukur, but particularly Dakshineshwar. Go there, but don't simply go there as on a casual basis. If you go there, look, think very deeply that this is where Thakur practiced this sadhana. This is where he went into ecstasy. This is where he was sitting with Radha. This is where he gave this initiation. Let these ideas go very deeply within. Let them become imprinted on the heart, so that when we sit for meditation, we can bring them back to the mind. So this idea of pilgrimage, actually visiting these places, is very, very helpful to this type of spiritual practice. There's an expression that we hear very often as one of the keys to spiritual life, and that is be here now. But this practice is just the opposite. I sometimes think that the key to spiritual life is be there then. Let the mind dwell in Dakshineshwar, in Kamarpukur, and when it's there, it's 1882 or 1883, depending, 84, during that period. Let the mind live in the past. We're told don't live in the past. This type of spiritual practice, we try to live in the past. We try to use this power of the imagination to keep the mind filled with these spiritual thoughts. It doesn't allow any other thought to come in. It can deepen our spiritual life. It can bring great joy. We'll find that we look forward to our meditation the same way that the disciples used to look forward to seeing Sri Ramakrishna. As soon as they left, they would count the minutes till they could see him again. This type of meditation can also have that pull for us, so that we'll long for the time when we can sit for meditation again and return to Thakur's room and sit with him. So this is, in brief, what I wanted to say. I thank all of you for your kindness and your patience. I end again by offering my respectful pranam and namaskar to all of you.